The great blue has long been one of the primal sources of fear, although in our modern day and age, we have as a species forgotten this fear by slowly creeping inland. We are no longer afraid of the ocean as we once were. Most of us will never experience the true scale of an ocean. Most people never have. Unlike darkness, loneliness, and death, the oceans can't follow us. Nyctophobia, autophobia, and thanatophobia are some of the most common phobias held by people to this day because they aren't situations people can leave behind and run away from. The fear of oceans is one that has grown uncommon, rather, a fear that is forgotten. At the same time, we city folk run to the oceans during summers and holidays. Beaches are a great tourist attraction. Despite dipping toes into the vast unknown, people commonly admire the superficial beauty of the place. Such a beautiful and serene being can instill such unparalleled fear? Is it possible to subtly capture the middle ground of beauty, silence, and the uncanny? Dredge is a 2023 indie fishing video game developed by New Zealand studio Black Salt Games and published by Team 17. The game has the player play as a fisherman who sails to the coastal town of Greater Marrow, situated in a distant archipelago. After crashing into the shore, he is offered a job as the town angler by the mayor. While the job is normal enough, the fisherman soon begins to notice strange phenomena, especially at night, where he encounters strange mist, hostile wildlife, and a paranoid feeling of being watched. In addition, as he sails around the local islands, he begins to find and pick up messages in bottles, which are diary entries written by a young newlywed wife, JJ. She recounts how she first arrived in the archipelago with her husband. Her husband, being a fisherman who partook in the act of dredging, brought up a mysterious casket from the sea floor, which he subsequently opened and released some sort of supernatural power. This persuasive entity convinced him to leave JJ. Unbeknownst to the young fisherman, that would be the last time he would see JJ. She was consumed by sorrow, loneliness, and was driven mad, eventually drowning herself at sea. Dredge draws clear inspiration from the works of Francis Bacon and H.P. Lovecraft. The appearance of imaginatively frightening sea creatures, hallucinations, and monsters of barely fathomable scale really sell the core idea of cosmic horror. The idea of cosmic horror was popularized in the 1920s by Lovecraft himself. Direct references can be drawn between certain monsters and Lovecraft's work, most recognizably Cthulhu. The presence of the Leviathan, a great sea serpent which has previously been referred to in the Hebrew Bible, is also a welcome and shocking presence. Cthulhu was first introduced to the readers of the pulp magazine Weird Tales in the summer of 1928. The story, known as The Call of Cthulhu, popularized the ancient deity who is known to be as large as is intimidating. Cthulhu has had various interpretations which bring about changes in scale and powers, the most noticeable feature of the monster being its octopoid head. Despite originating in the mind of Lovecraft, Cthulhu has developed a fan base of its own, with various writers adding to the lore and increasing its popularity to this date, which has given rise to a library of literature, movies, and games known as the Cthulhu mythos. The Call of Cthulhu was a short story having 3 parts. The story followed the experiences and encounters with the primordial deity Cthulhu, the unforgiving ocean, and a strange cult obsessed with the mysterious creature. A bas relief depicting Cthulhu was discovered by a Boston resident investigating the deity. He received it from his great uncle, who was a professor studying the bas relief and the supposed sea creature. The artwork was supposedly retrieved from a cult worshipping the ancient being. This cult was obsessed with the power of the ring, evidently performing human sacrifices in the name of this creature that might exist. It is later revealed by a seaman that it was discovered by him and his crew when they unfortunately crossed paths with pirates and were then forced to take them to their intended site. They went on to awaken the sea deity from its slumber. Of the 8 people, only 2 survived. One was driven mad by the traumatic experience, while the other went on to deliver the art piece to the professor. The final survivor also went missing later on, supposedly and speculatively murdered by the cult. Lovecraft's work didn't take off at the time, and he died a poor man. His works were later reanalyzed and brought to light in a revival done in the 1970s, when he garnered much praise. He is currently one of the most accomplished and popular writers of all time. The first letter is found in the lower right corner of E5 on the map. The letter is a diary entry by JJ after she is married and recounts her experiences. She speaks of how they had gone to the Stellar Basin to see the lights, the Stellar Basin being an area with luminescent flora and fauna. She writes of how she and her fiance talked for hours on end, something they hadn't done in a long time. She mentions how it had passed midnight and they were growing delirious due to a lack of sleep. She was enjoying the aurora when he proposed for their engagement. She was ecstatic and said yes to his proposal. She later speaks of how she is unsure of what day it is due to it probably being past midnight, hence the mixed date. Keep in mind the mention of lack of sleep or inability to sleep causing an individual to grow delirious. Its relevance will be stated later. The second letter can be found on the border of N13 and N14, east the figure in red side quest. The letter is another diary excerpt by JJ after her mother-in-law passed of sickness. It is evident that she didn't have a good relation with her mother-in-law, and that her mother-in-law was a petty kind of woman. She writes about her mother-in-law's will reading and how most of the remaining estate went to her husband. Curiously, she left a pocket watch for her, which she is sure to be some sort of petty jab for her being late to some ceremony. She does not like the watch itself, but she kept it for her husband's mind would be at ease if she did so. JJ accounts the second morning of their honeymoon. She writes of the fisherman performing a superstitious renaming ceremony in her honor. He plans on naming his vessel Julie after his new wife. The renaming of a ship has a ceremony whereby all the items with the old ship's name are to be discarded. Julie decided to keep a small keychain with the vessel's original name, Ocean's Riches. JJ writes of the fisherman having a slight accident while sailing in Greater Marrow. A rock supposedly appeared out of nowhere. It was a minor accident, but some items fell overboard. The fisherman seemed panicked and is sure that something went wrong with the renaming ceremony, which throws JJ off guard, considering she never knew him to be so superstitious. JJ writes of how bored she is alone at home and wishes to come with her husband on his fishing expeditions. He supposedly fears she will not gel with the crew and therefore insists against it. But she can't help but act needy sometimes. She even mentions him installing new salvaging equipment on his boat, or dredging tools. JJ writes of how she has been unwell, has been having constant chills, and is affected by a fog in her brain. The letter then becomes ineligible until she writes about how her husband hauled up a wooden casket, which on opening spilled out crimson cloth. Her husband stared into the casket and turned to her, and she claimed, "In his eyes I saw the void." This letter seems to be an account by JJ after she was left by the fisherman. Her descent into madness and desperation is evident. This seems to be a final letter by JJ in which she claims to have finally found her husband again. She goes on to claim there is only one thing left to be done: throw me back. This I believe to be an account of the items which were thrown overboard or found on the fisherman's vessel. The items found being an oaken music box engraved with the letter J, speculatively JJ, a wooden mask signifying luck, fertility, good health, protection from evil spirits and fortune, a 12-piece tea set, probably a wedding gift, jar of earth from a site of meteor impact, which is probably the stellar basin. The meteor impact might be a reference to the creatures and artifacts being linked to aliens. A receipt for a silver necklace with emeralds on silver mounting with the engraving, "For Jane, my shining star." The fisherman's note is a riddle of sorts, and here is my attempt at deconstructing the letter. Deep sky, deep, forever. A probable additional reference to the creatures and power being cosmic in nature. Deep sky can be a reference to outer space, while the repetition may be a reference to the gravitas of the concept. Casket seal broken. Fog core? This is probably talk about how since the casket was opened, the entire area has been covered by fog whenever night approaches. This could also be a reference to the fisherman feeling the same way JJ did when she was unwell. As mentioned in her account of 14 September, she wrote, "Fog in my brain." 5 equals rise is a reference to the 5 artifacts he must find in order to deal with the strange events. And finally, he knows. There is a 12th letter, isn't there? Close now. Nobody knows. Does he know? Desecrated temple, forgive me. The only way he might understand. Must help him. Must stop him. Before I can talk about characters, I'd like to briefly go over the events of the game. The game is simple on surface level. You're a fisherman who has taken up the job of a town angler. You catch fish, sell them to the fishmonger, and pay off your debt. Every character in the game seems to be seeing you for the first time, other than the lighthouse keeper who seems to remember you from somewhere. Being an old lady, you don't pay much mind to her and return to your peaceful fishing activities. You start finding strange mutated and monster fish for which the fishmonger seems to be paying more, since they are rare, especially in the early game. You even start having encounters with uncatchable sea monsters, which attack the fishermen at sight. You discover a little handkerchief in one of the mutant fish, which a mysterious man asks you to sell to him. You meet him in his island off the side of the Mallows. He gives you a quest to search for artifacts. You find another 4 artifacts, in exchange of which he gives you seemingly supernatural abilities he grants you through a mysterious book he has. You eventually go to grab the book when you realize that you have been talking to a mirror all this time, and the first encounter the fisherman had with the collector was in his own ship's window, a reflection. From here, the player is free to approach one of 2 endings. The fisherman, being the protagonist, is one of the most interesting characters in the story. Often seen as a lazy way to drive a punch by critics, the fisherman follows the trope of the unreliable narrator. The unreliable narrator is a trope in films, games, and books where the narrator's perception or rendition of a story is flawed and often deviates from the true happenings. The true events are portrayed at the end as the twist. However, the use of this trope has lost its luster through the ages due to being highly overused. Fight Club, Shutter Island, Gone Girl, The Catcher in the Rye, and Clockwork Orange being some examples. Dredge, however, unexpectedly makes the twist hit without a hint of the fisherman being afflicted by psychological ailments. The fisherman suffers from various speculative ailments, likely caused by the casket itself. The fisherman shows clear signs of dissociative identity disorder, or DID, which has him split to create the collector and the fisherman. The collector being the side of him obsessed with supernatural entities that feed, while the fisherman is the caring, understanding Samaritan he once was. The fisherman also shows signs of something known as dissociative amnesia, where he selectively forgets painful parts of his past which he could no longer bear with. A very obvious example of this is his memories with JJ and the supernatural entity. The fisherman seems to have split himself into who he is and who he regrets becoming. The fisherman also shows clear signs of scopophobia, or a fear of being watched, when he hasn't slept for long. The player's neglect to sleep also ties to the narrative, being both JJ and the fisherman were insomniacs, as previously mentioned. JJ starts off being a normal character with a cute romantic side story, only to reveal that she is the main driving force of the plot. JJ, other than being delirious due to insomnia, is more or less a normal character in the beginning. She eventually shows clear signs of depression after the fisherman leaves her, and likely schizophrenia when she finally decides to drown herself. The psychosis held by JJ and the fisherman can be traced back to the supernatural entities which have likely come from space, alien creatures. This supernatural entity has stemmed to the psychosis of the fisherman and indirectly JJ. In her last letter, JJ mentions "throw me back," being a reference to her figuring that the fisherman's fallout started with his dredging up the casket and releasing the entities. This was likely a final plea from her to save her husband, despite knowing she could never have him back since he had been corrupted. The only way he was able to return to a fragment of his original self was by dissociating with most, if not all, of his past. Other than influences by the supernatural entity, JJ and the fisherman have been seen to have problems sleeping and hallucinate as a result, something that can be explored through the game's Panic Meter, where a lack of sleep and light induce panic and hallucinations. The lighthouse keeper is the only character who recognizes the fisherman in the early game, and seems to be the only interactable aged person from the area where the fisherman and JJ once lived. The lighthouse keeper seems very cold on his arrival and questions why he chose to return. She speculatively remembers JJ as well, was likely somewhat close to her. The lighthouse keeper directly helps the fisherman reach the good ending. While neither of the endings are good or bad, it is made clear by the final outcomes which ending is more clean than the other. The good ending concludes with the lighthouse keeper showing the fisherman the way to the place where his wife drowned herself. He goes to the exact location and throws the book back into the ocean, where the Leviathan swallows the fisherman's ship. The credits proceed to roll, showing the rest of the islands peaceful and the fog clearing. This ending signifies that the curse or entity has been destroyed. Rather, their grasp on the islands has been severed. Although this ending leads to the death of our protagonist, it is the better ending of the two, that you will see in a bit. The bad ending makes the fisherman jump through a few more hoops of his tarnished psyche to bring his wife back to life. This ending shows the fisherman and his wife reuniting as she emerges from the ocean. Immediately, a giant demonic entity emerges from the depths, presumably and most likely the creature in the stellar basin, Cthulhu. The credits begin to roll, showing the islands in ruin and overrun by fires. Finally, we've reached the monsters, the creatures, the artifacts are all aliens. Let's go over this real quick. The third ability the collector unlocks for us is Banish, an ability which deters the sea monsters from attacking us, a seemingly perfect win button. But then again, it doesn't work on all creatures, most notably Mother Piranha and the Leviathan. But why is this so? Why does it selectively choose not to deter these monsters? Well, it's quite simple, isn't it? For the Mother Piranha at least, she can't see. The Mother Piranha is a monster which doesn't have eyes and is guided only by its supposed children, which are these irritating little piranhas who cannot actually do any damage, but instead slow the boat down. The Banish ability is the third of the 4 abilities granted by the Collector. The Collector has the ability to bestow these abilities on the Fisherman with the help of the mysterious book, likely retrieved from the casket. The casket is one of the artifacts which came to Earth along with the supposed alien creatures, so it has the ability to deter the alien creatures who bear the power of sight. The Leviathan, however, isn't from the casket. It makes sense. You can only encounter the Leviathan in the open ocean or when you try to leave the map, while the alien creatures are localized to the respective islands. When the good ending is achieved, the Leviathan swallows the book and the ship together, thereby making it impossible for the alien creatures to persist any longer. The Leviathan reclaimed its home. While in the bad ending, the alien creature gains ultimate power and claims the islands as its own. So, Dredge deals with heavy topics along with having simple, fun, and engaging gameplay. Tied together with an interesting narrative, I spent the better part of a week playing this game with Rex, and he was genuinely addicted to the act of dredging. While being incredibly simplistic and pretty on surface level, the game overthrows expectations by captivating the feelings of a simulator, simple horror, and a psychological thriller. I rate the game a solid 7, while Rex rates it around 8.5. Hey guys, Rex and I have been wanting to make a video essay for a while now, and Dredge was the game that we were playing. It had a pretty interesting narrative, so we decided to make a video on it. Hope you all liked it.
In the first appearance, the game seems to be boring, but then we get power-ups and new fish to unlock. That's why I really like this game. When we tried to explore the coast, there were new fish and monsters. Hope you liked it, BB.